Hi guys, John from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. And I want to give you guys an idea of what home inspectors are going to look for when you're thinking about buying a home as far as plumbing defects. I know we went briefly over electrical defects, but I just really want to touch on some of the plumbing defects that home inspectors here in New Jersey are going to be looking for when they conduct, your home inspection. And this is not certainly going to be a comprehensive, all-inclusive list of every plumbing defect available, but it's just an idea of some of the things that we're going to look for. Now, what I do, I like to look at the valves inside a home. I like to talk about what type of valves are there because a lot of these older homes, they're not going to have upgraded or modernized valves. And we'll see a lot of older style gate valves in these older homes. Not even in that old. I'm talking about, from the 60s, 70s, and even, from the early 80s and such. But we really want to make sure that these valves are in good condition. So I like to look at these valves, look for any type of corrosion and leakage around these valves. And also what I want to do is tell my client that, hey, they should really think about upgrading these old valves to something more modern, like a ball valve, right? More reliable. It's a valve with a handle, easy to turn, a lot more reliable than these old style, gate style valves. And also the valves under toilets and under these sinks. I see these, stupid valves with plastic, stem. And you know what? These things are just not reliable, okay? They're just garbage. And what we want to do is because the client's not really going to be aware that these valves are really poor. So I just like to tell them about it. Hey, you know what? You should really upgrade these valves, and here's why: because you really want these valves to be reliable, and you don't want them to fail. Because a lot of the times you're going to turn these old valves and they're not going to work, they're going to be stuck, or they're going to start leaking, right? So that's not what we want, right? We want a reliable valve if we're going to isolate, a plumbing fixture, and we don't want to deal with leakage and stuff. We don't want to be running down to the main and then turning that off. And also, the main water cutoff valve should be a nice, reliable valve too. It shouldn't just be, just an older style gate valve full of rust, right? We want these valves to be operational because that's the most important valve in the home, right? You want to turn off water to the whole house if something goes wrong with your plumbing system. But you can't do that if your valve is all corroded and it's an older style valve. You can't even budge it, right? So we like to call these out. I mean, I like to tell my customer that, hey, you should really think about upgrading these old valves, especially on the main water line, because you got to have this working, right? This is really really important. So look for these old valves, okay, in homes, and you should really try to upgrade them if you can. You don't have to do it right away, but put it on your list to do. Make sure that the valves in your home, the water supply valves in your home, are good and reliable. Another thing I like to do is I like to look for these saddle valves, right? So a saddle valve is sometimes referred to as a needle valve, and we see these a lot of times. They're supplying water flow to either like a humidifier or an ice maker, something like that, or a water filter. And these are those small, thin valves that actually you turn to install, and it actually pierces the pipe, right? Whoever thought this was a good idea, this is not a good idea. So I like to call these out too, because it's just really a question of when these valves are going to start leaking, right? And you don't want to be on vacation. You don't want to be away from the family. How many times you're looking under your sink to see your saddle valves start to leak, right? So just make sure that these valves are replaced with good, nice, quarter turn, reliable valves that you can rely on, not these cheap needle or saddle valves. So I like to, look at that as well. And another thing that home inspectors here in New Jersey are going to be looking for is DIY, do-it-yourself plumbing, right? And we see this all the time in homes, where that sort of that basement was turned, there's a bathroom in the basement. They wanted to add a shower. and they do all kind of crazy plumbing configurations, no trapping, poor waste pipe pitch, nothing works, and they want to kind of pass that off as licensed work by a plumber. So home inspectors, we're trained to identify, this really poor plumbing work in home and this DIY. So two things you don't really want to do on a homeowner basis, and one of them is electrical and one of them is plumbing, right? Electrical, you can get yourself killed or kill somebody, and then with the plumbing, you can have flooding and damage and mold and all kinds of stuff can go wrong with plumbing if you decide to do it yourself plumbing in homes. So we're trained to look for this kind of, do it yourself plumbing stuff. So it's very important that, that we do that. Another thing that home inspectors here in New Jersey are going to look for is improper venting of the plumbing system. Now, sometimes we go into a house and we can't really see much of the plumbing system, especially if it's a modern home with a finished basement and you just can't, most of the waste piping is going to be behind finishes. But what we can do is run water at the fixtures, right? And we want to make sure that everything drains properly, of course, that there's good functional drainage, right? And that the water from the drains and toilets and the sinks and the showers, everything drains easily, right? We don't want to hear any gurgling noises, right? So we want to put our hand over the drain. We want to stop that water flow either with a stopper or with our hand. And we want to build up some water in the sink basin. We want to let that water run out, and then we want to listen, right? So what we're listening for is that siphoning action or gurgling that we sometimes hear in the sink drains, sometimes in bathrooms, sometimes in kitchens, and sometimes, actually when the shower or tub is draining. So that gurgling sound is an indication that there is inadequate ventilation in the plumbing system or the waste pipe system. So we don't have enough air behind the water and we're siphoning. That's what's causing that gurgling noise. And it's not only annoying to hear that gurgling noise, but it's actually an indication that sewer gas can be entering the house. So we don't want that. So we're listening closely as our fixtures are draining, right? It's just, we're as home inspectors, we're using most of our senses, right? Our eyes, our smell, right? We're our ears, we're using all of these senses to check out and see if there's problems in a home. And one of the things we can do is check for that gurgling noise in the fixtures. And if it is, we can call that out. And that's something that really, should be corrected. Another thing that I look for is poor washing machine supply hoses and valves, right? So the last thing you want to do is have a customer, do a home inspection and they come back and then they have a leak or some kind of flood because their old rubberized washing machine hoses let go and they weren't home or the valves failed, right? So I always look at these valves, and if they're those old, again, those gate style valves, or they're looking poor or crusty, or have rusting, have corrosion, or they have, so these rubber hoses supplying the washing machine hot and cold, I call that out. I want to see a good, solid one-touch valve there, or a couple of ball style valves, one for the hot, one for the cold that can be easily turned off, right, and isolated, right? So that client is done with their washing for the day, and they want to just you want to just turn those valves off. Very reliable because those washing machine hoses are always under pressure, and we don't really want to come home to a big leak or anything like that. I always like to see some type of tray under the washing machine. At least it gives you a little bit more time to react to a problem. Throw a cheap water alarm in there also is certainly not a bad idea. But insurance companies too, they want photos sometimes of your configuration of the washing machine water supply hoses and what kind of valves you have. We want to recommend those metal mesh hoses, right? So the outside of the hose is that metal mesh. It tends to be more reliable, just a little bit more robust than the cheap rubber hoses that come with the equipment, right? So we want to always make sure that we're upgrading those for sure. Another thing that I like to look for, and I do, I've never had a problem with this, but other home inspectors, they have a problem with this. I don't understand why. But anyway, I like to put a knee into a toilet. I like to see if the toilet is secure to the floor, right? I've never had a problem doing it with this. I don't know if other home inspectors have, been blamed for leakage or whatnot. I've always done this, and I think it's important. You don't want to sit on the toilet and then be, moving around, right? The toilet should be nice and firm to the floor, right? There should be no leakage around the toilet base, right? That it would indicate a wax ring is leaking, right? And also in the basement, if it's an unfinished basement, we want to look up and we want to see the bathroom, underside of the bathroom. Sometimes you can see the bathtub drain system. You can see the trap. Sometimes you could actually see where the toilet underneath in the ceiling, and we want to make sure that we don't see any leakage there. But I like to put a knee into the toilet. I mean, not crazy, but if the toilet's loose at the floor, you're going to see that toilet move, right? Sometimes it moves side to side, or sometimes it just jiggles. Sometimes it goes back to front, and we don't really want that. We don't want a customer surprised, now that they're using the toilet for the first time. Now that they're on some kind of carnival ride because the toilet's not secure to the floor, right? So I do that. I think it's important. I don't understand why some home inspectors wouldn't do that, but I do it. I think it's important to know if that toilet is loose. Another thing we're going to look for, especially in homes, that predate the 1960s, is galvanized water supply pipes, right? So these are the old water supply pipes. These guys rust from the inside out, and what they actually do is constrict, right? So you have a bunch of rust forming inside the pipe. The pipe's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, almost like a clogged artery, and then you're going to have constricted or poor water flow through the pipe. So, and also another thing about these galvanized pipes is that insurance companies, they don't want to insure houses with active galvanized pipes anymore. Why? Because they're past their life expectancy, and it's just really a matter of time before there's a problem. So as home inspectors here in New Jersey, we're going to be looking for these old galvanized water pipes. Now, it's true that most of these have been replaced, right? The copper, PEX, that type of thing. But there's some out there that have not been replaced, and it's up to us home inspectors to identify those as galvanized water pipes and to call them out. I think that's really important to do that. Another thing we look for if the waste piping system is exposed is poor pitch of the waste pipe system. So sometimes you'll go and it'll sort of be a DIY situation, and you'll have sort of a negative slope of the waste pipes, from a fixture, or you'll have a neutral slope on a long run, and water will retain in that waste pipe. And especially if somebody is doing their own plumbing work, sometimes it is challenging to pitch these waste pipes properly. But that's not our problem. Our issue with home inspections is to call out these problems, right? And we let our customer know, especially if we visualize and we see waste piping that is improperly pitched or sloped, right? Because that is an issue. Water's going to build up there. You can have a backup. You can have a slow drain. And, nothing good happens with that. So everything is using natural gravity flow. And we water's not going to flow uphill, right? So we want to see a nice slope on all of these waste pipes for sure. I think that's super important. Another thing that we look for is proper traps under fixtures, on the sinks. Sometimes not all traps are visible, but if the trap is visible, we want to make sure that there's no leakage and that the trap is configured correctly. And sometimes we see all kind of crazy, just kind of do-it-yourselfer, flexible piping going every which way, so to make that trap connection. And we don't really want to see that. Those flexible pipes, I mean, look, if you need to use that in a pinch, fine. They're not really permanent pipes. They're just going to, collect debris and hair, especially if it's in a bathroom. And we don't really want to see that. We want to see a nice, rigid PVC trap if possible. This way we don't have all that gunk getting caught up in the trap. So home inspectors are also going to look for proper trapping under the fixtures. And I think that's really, really important. Another thing that I look for too, and I'm cognizant, especially if the family that I'm doing work for has young children, is the water temperature, right? We don't really want superheated hot water coming out of the fixtures where somebody can really be scalded or burned. We don't want to have that. And that's something that is very important. So domestic hot water, we really want about between 120 and 130 degrees on the high end. That sweet spot is probably 125-ish, right around there. But if it's super like 140, 150, that's too hot. It's almost coming out boiling. And you can put that on, you can see the steam rising. And then, we need to tell our client that, hey, the water in this house is too hot. And then we have to figure out why it's too hot. So I like to go back down to the water heater, see what's going on. Many, many times we'll just see the water heater just turned up too high. And sometimes it's turned up high because they like hot water, and sometimes it's turned up too high because they're trying to overcompensate for something. And that overcompensation is probably sediment, built up at the bottom of the water heater. So they turn that up high, thinking that that's going to overcompensate and make so they have adequate hot water. But what they've really done is create an unsafe condition with the scalding hot water. So make sure you home inspectors here are checking that hot water temperature because it's sometimes, it's just really, really, it's just really, really too hot. Another thing that we do here, that I do, is I like to use an infrared camera after I, run the sinks and tubs upstairs. And I just like to utilize that camera to look for any signature of water that is not visible to me with the naked eye, right? So IR camera is not a catch-all, but it certainly has its place. And we want to look for that signature of that really hot water signature in the ceiling, which is going to be, bright red, splotchy type signature. Or we're going to look for that cold water signature, depending on what you're running upstairs. That cold water signature with sort of blotchy blue signature in the middle, it doesn't make any sense. It's not from your air conditioning or anything like that. What would it be? It could be a leak. It could be a leak. Doesn't mean it always is. But at least using an IR camera in this fashion gives you a little bit of a reference as to, maybe doing a further investigation with a moisture meter under, the sinks and the tubs, especially, in the second floor if you're down in the first floor. So these are just some of the things that I look for. I also check out the sump pumps, and I know this is not really like official plumbing, but to me, it's part of the plumbing inspection, I think. And we always want to make sure that plumbing of the sump pump is going far enough away from the home so it's not causing a problem where that water is backing up close to the foundation wall, right? We want that sump pump discharge far away. And we want to make sure that sump pump discharge is not going to the waste piping or the sewer line, right? Because that's a no-no in many municipalities. We don't want to overrun the city sewer with a bunch of groundwater, right? And then we can have a nasty problem with the backup. So make sure that sump pump is running free and not connected to the sewer lines in the home. We want to make sure that is running far enough away from the home not to be an issue. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the things that New Jersey home inspectors are going to look for in your plumbing system. It's not everything. There's so many thousands of things that comprehensive home inspectors are going to look for when you hire them to do a home inspection. So if I can help in any way, talk about these problems, or you just want to reach out about your own house, my name is John. I'm from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.